This is a video about representing data using pie charts. The first thing to bear in mind about pie charts is that a full pie chart represents a full rotation, and a full rotation equals 360 degrees, and this information will be useful to us throughout our calculations with pie charts. The simplest thing we might be asked to do with a pie chart is to find an unknown angle. So here, for example, we have a pie chart with 4 different sections, and I'm told the angles in 3 of those. So I've got 80 degrees, 120 degrees. Here I haven't got a value, but you should know at this stage that that symbol represents 90 degrees. So the only one that I don't know is the X, and that's what I want to calculate. Bear in mind, like we said a minute ago, a full rotation is 360 degrees. So the total of the angles in the pie chart must be 360. Pause the video at this stage, work out X yourself, and then play and check if you were correct. So I'm going to add these 3 angles together, giving me a total of 290. X will be 360 minus 290, so X equals to 70. We might also be asked to identify what fraction of the total pie chart is represented by each segment. Let's stick with the same diagram here to answer this question. You'll notice that I've given each part of the diagram a name, just so that it's clear which one I'm referring to in each case. We've got A, B, C and D, and I'd like to know what fraction of the pie chart each of these represents. This is very simple to do, especially since I know what the total is. I know the total is 360. So once I know the angle in each of the portions of the pie chart, all I need to do to find what fraction it is simply put it over 360. For example, with A, since A has a size of 90 degrees, I simply put 90 over 360, and I can cancel this down if I like to give 1/4. So A represents 1/4 of the total pie chart. At this stage, pause the video and calculate what fraction of the total pie chart is represented by B, C and D, and then play and see if you're correct. So B has a size of 80 degrees, so we'll put 80 over 360, and if we cancel this down, we get 2/9 of the total. C is 70, so I should write 70 over 360, and I can cancel this down to 7 over 36. D has an angle of 120 degrees, so I write 120 over 360, and so D represents 1/3 of the total. I'm going to continue to use the same diagram to explain the next part, which is how to find what value each portion of the pie chart represents. So in this example, I'm going to say that this same pie chart represents the answers to a multiple choice question chosen by 72 students. So some people chose A as their answer, some people chose B, some chose C, and some chose D. And there were 72 students involved, and I want to know how many students chose option A, how many students chose option B, and so on. Now, I know what the angle is for each of these regions, but the angle doesn't tell me how many people. So for example, 80 degrees doesn't mean that 80 students chose B. But I want to use that number to help me work out how many students were involved in that particular choice. And this kind of follows on from the last section of the video that we looked at here, working out what fraction of the total is represented by each segment. So we'll start with A. Okay, so I mightn't know how many students A represents, but I know what angle it is, and so I know what fraction of the total it is. So A represents 90 over 360. That's the fraction of the total students that's represented by A. So what I really want to do is find 90 over 360 of the total. Now, you might remember that of always means multiply. So I'm going to multiply my fraction by the total. And in this case, that's 72 because there are 72 students in total. So I'll, on my calculator, type in 90 over 360 times 72, and I'll get a result of 18. So that means 18 students chose option A. At this stage, pause the video and try and do it for B, C and D yourself, and then play and check and see if you're correct. Okay, so for B, I've got 80 over 360, and I want to multiply this by 72. And when I put it into the calculator, I get 16, so I know that 16 students chose option B. C has 70 degrees I should say, so I'm going to say 70 over 360 by 72, and I get an answer of 14 students. And finally, to calculate D. there are 120 degrees in D, so I say 120 over 360 and times this by 72, and this gives me 24 students. Now, it's always nice if I have a way of checking to see if I'm definitely correct at the end of a question, and in this case I can do that quite easily by just taking my 4 results and totting them up. So I'd expect to get 72, and let's just check that. When I total up those 4 values, I do in fact get 72. So I know that I'm correct. I might also be given information about what the value of each portion of the pie chart is, and then be asked to work out the angles that I should use to represent it in the pie chart. So here's our example. We have a table showing the meal choices of 40 people, and we want to calculate the angles for the pie chart of this data. It's always a good plan at the start of a question involving a table to work out your total, and in this case actually we're told it in the question. You might remember from an earlier chapter that the total number of pieces of data can be called n, and in this case n equals to 40. Remember also that a pie chart is a full rotation, so in total its angles must add up to 360. So to find the angle that should represent each of these choices, what I need to do is I need to write down the number of people that chose it over the total. For example, with lasagna, that should be 16 over 40. So now this is the fraction of the people that chose that particular dinner option. To convert this into an angle for the pie chart, I should work out what degree represents it by multiplying by 360. So just to recap there, I put the number over the total and times by 360. And in this case, I get 144 degrees. At this stage, pause the video and repeat this for burger, chicken and fish, and then play the video and see if you were correct for those calculations. Okay, so burger has a value of 8. There were 8 people chose it. So I put 8 over 40 and I times it by 360. And this time I get 72 degrees. Just something interesting here to note. See how 16 is twice as big as 8? 144 is twice as big as 72. So there's relationships sometimes within the numbers themselves as well. Chicken had a value of 12 people. So I put 12 over 40 and times by 360, and I get 108 degrees. Finally for fish, I put 4 over 40 and multiply by 360, and I get 36. Just like before, it's a really good idea, since I know what the total of the angles should be, to actually do a quick tot and just check, does this all come to 360 degrees? And that will just reassure me that I've calculated them correctly. And when I add these values up, I do in fact get that 360. So I know that I'm correct. So we're going to use the same table again, but this time we're going to look at how to construct the pie chart to go with it. And the question says, draw a pie chart to represent this data. Now the first step that we would have to take is to work out the angles that we'd need in our pie chart. We actually just did that a moment ago, so we already know what each of our angles should be. Our next step in constructing our pie chart is to draw our circle. To do this, we can use a compass, but if you don't have a compass available, just draw the best circle you can. The most important thing is that we measure our angles correctly in a moment with our protractor. So if you don't have a compass, don't worry too much, but do try and get your hands on one as soon as you can. So I'm going to draw my circle for my pie chart. When I've drawn the circle, I'm going to mark in the centre of the circle. And if you've used your compass, there should be a little tiny hole in the middle of the circle where the point of the compass went through the paper. That'll make it easy to find. So I've marked that centre point in just there. Now I'm going to draw in a line on my pie chart. I'm drawing in a line just like as if a hand was pointing to 3 o'clock on the clock face. And this image that I have here now in front of me is how I start every single pie chart. So no matter what the angles are, you always begin by doing this. And now I'm ready to start measuring my angles. So I'm going to use my protractor to do this measuring. And you may already be familiar with how to use a protractor, but just in case you're not, I'll give you a quick run through of how it works. I'm going to start by making sure that this little crosshairs here where the vertical and horizontal lines cross over on my protractor line up exactly with the end of my line, which happens to be the center of my pie chart. I'm also going to make sure that this horizontal line here lines up, and it's the black horizontal line that I'm pointing to, that goes from 0 to 180, lines up exactly with the line that I've drawn. I'm being as careful about this as I possibly can be, because if I'm a bit off, then I'm going to end up drawing my angles inaccurately. Okay, I'm satisfied so that everything is lined up as it should be. My point is exactly where it should be, and my line is lined up perfectly. Notice how this line is pointing to this 0 on the protractor. So this is the 0 that I'm going to count from. My first angle has to be 144 degrees. So starting at the 0, I'm going to work up through my angles 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and all the way around until I get to, okay, I'm at 140 now, and there's 150, but I need to mark 144. To make things easier for myself, I'm going to go out to the outside of my protractor. See how the 140 lines up with the 40. So if I want to mark in 144, I'm just going to go 4 little dashes on from the 40. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll put a little tick or a little dash outside my diagram here with my pen, and then I'll take my ruler and I'll line it up from the center of my circle to that dash that I just made, and I'll draw that in then. Make sure that as you're working your way through your diagram that you always use pencil so that you can correct any mistakes that you make. Now that I've drawn this portion of my diagram here, I'm going to mark in the size of its angle. That was 144 degrees, and I'm also going to label that portion of the diagram with lasagna. It has been brought to my attention that I may be spelling lasagna wrong, but we'll live with it. So now I'm going to measure out my angle for burgers, which is 72 degrees. Now, when I'm measuring that 72 degrees, I'm measuring it from this last line that I drew. So while initially I have my protractor lined up like this with my first line, now I'm going to turn it around so that it's lining up with this last line that I drew. But I still need to make sure that the point at the center of my pie chart is exactly in line with these 2 little lines here, and I have to make sure that the line that I just drew is perfectly lined up with this black line on the protractor also. And now I want to measure the angle. So again, I have a look at the line that I'm lined up with, this line here. I've highlighted in yellow so you can see it hopefully, and this line is pointing to this 0 here, so that's the 0 I'm going to count from. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, I want 72. I'm going to come out to this 110 because it lines up perfectly with the 70, and I'm going to go on 2 little tiny dashes and put a tick. So that's where 72 is located. And then I'll take the protractor out, I'll bring my ruler in, and I'll draw my line. And again, like before, I'm going to mark in the angle and the name of the region. So this was 72 degrees and it was the burger. Next we're on to chicken. So again, I'll take my protractor and I'll line it up with the last line that I drew. So I'm doing the same thing each time, lining it up the last line that I drew. I'm making sure as carefully as I can that my center point is lined up perfectly with this little crosshairs here, and that my line that I just drew is lined up perfectly with the black line on the protractor. Now I want to measure an angle of 108. Again, notice how the line is pointing to this 0, so I'll count from here. 10, 20, 30, 40, all the way around to, there's 100, there's 110. I don't want to quite get to 110, I want to be just 108, so just before it. So I'll come out to the 70, and then I'll just backtrack 2 little dashes. And I'm at 108 there now. So I'll put my dash, and then I will line up my ruler with the center of the pie chart, and I'll draw my line. Notice how my dash is outside the pie chart, but I only draw the line as far as the edge of the pie chart. And just like before then, I want to mark in the angle and the name of the meal. So 108 degrees, and that was for chicken. And finally I've got fish, and it's the last region of my diagram that I need to measure. But you might actually notice that it's kind of been created by default, so I actually don't need to measure this guy out. It probably wouldn't be a bad plan though, just to check and see if you've been correct so far, to take your protractor, line it up with the last line that you drew, and just check and see if it looks like it's measuring 36 degrees. So there's 0, 30, yeah, that looks like it's lined up with 36 all right, so I reckon that I've done it correctly. So I'll remove the protractor and I'll just fill in that last little bit of detail. So 36 degrees represents fish. To finish off my diagram completely, I should really include a title. And something that just generically describes what's going on in the pie chart is fine. So here I've called it the dinner choices pie chart. Whenever you draw any graph to represent data, you should always include a title for the graph.